Okay, please be seated. Thank you, everybody. Well, I see a couple people have notes, so let me just give you a further admonition with respect to note-taking. You are permitted to take notes, but you are not permitted to take the notes with you when you leave in the evening. You have to leave your notes here. Our court reporter or Sarah, somebody will pick up the notepads and then leave them for you tomorrow morning. As I told you before, it's very important that you concentrate on the witness's testimony and the witnesses themselves, because you have to determine the credibility or the believability of the witnesses. And if you're taking too many notes, it's very hard to really concentrate on what the witness is saying or looking at the witness. Remember, it's not what's in your notes or in your fellow jurors' notes, it's what's in your mind and what is your collective memory with respect to the matters in this particular case. So with that in mind, I'm going to have the attorneys give you their opening comments. In the beginning of the trial, I told you that the attorneys will have an opportunity to make some comments to you. The opening statements are the attorneys' opinions of what they think the evidence has shown. It is not evidence. Since the state of Ohio has the burden of proof, the state will have the opportunity to go first with respect to his opening comments, and the defense will go second. Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, everyone. Helen Steins is 65 years old. She's retired now. She lives on Social Security. She worked as a hairdresser for years. She also worked over at the jail preparing food for the sheriff for the inmates. She was married for a time, but now she's divorced. She has 3 adult children. Last year, Helen was running into financial problems. She owned one piece of real estate. It had been in her family for over 100 years. It was the original homestead that her family lived in when they settled in this area. And that house was at 653 Lightner Road. Helen had lived in that house off and on during her life. For the last 5 or 6 years, she was living in an apartment because she didn't want to have to heat the house, which was an old farmhouse, over the winter. So she'd shut the utilities off, moved into an apartment to control her costs. But she'd run into some medical problems. Hospital had put liens on the house. Ottawa County had put tax liens on the house. And she realized that if she didn't sell the house, she was going to lose the house on taxes, and it was going to be sold in a tax sale. And the house was full of property. It belonged to her family members going back to when they originally built the place. And some of this stuff would be important only to a family member. Some of it would have value on the open market to someone interested in antiques. So what Helen Steins did was she contacted a realtor. She contacted a woman named Janine Porter sometime around the end of March, either March 29th or March 30th. They went out, they looked at the house. It was Janine Porter's opinion that because the house hadn't been lived in a while, probably wasn't up to code, that the smartest way of getting a quick sale done on the house, there was 2 alternatives. You could put a lot of money into it and repaint, do the landscaping, do all the renovations you need to do to make the house attractive to a buyer at this point, or you could sell it as is for basically the land value of the property. And the house sat on 5 acres. And in Danbury Township, that's a substantial chunk of land. Well, Helen Steins didn't have the money to put into the house to raise the overall house value. So the house was put on the market for the real estate value only. While all this is going on April 3rd, Janine Porter is attending an ethics continuing legal education seminar for realtors over in Sandusky. And while she's there, she runs into Steve Kraus. And she's known Mr. Kraus for a couple of years. And she mentions to him a problem that Janine Porter had. Janine Porter owned an antique car. I think it was a 1932 Chevrolet with suicide doors that parked in the garage on the property. She wanted to sell the car as she was getting rid of some of these other assets. And Janine Porter mentioned to Stephen Kraus that her client, Helen Steins, wanted to put the car on eBay to see if somebody wanted to buy it. And the car was intact, it had all of its parts, it hadn't run in several years, but from a car collector standpoint, this was something that could be restored. As she has further conversations with Mr. Kraus, people are contacting her about selling or buying the property. And she tells Mr. Kraus that she's going to be tied up from about 11 o'clock on Friday to about 2 o'clock on Friday, talking with potential buyers and meeting with Helen Steins to go over offers. At noon, Mr. Kraus shows up at the house. We know that because Roger Peen was home. Now, Roger Peen is a gentleman who's a little older. He's going back to school. He was studying engineering classes over at TerraTech in Fremont. He'd worked in factories all his life, had a lot of experience with industrial stuff, and wanted to increase his educational ability. He'd gone back to school. He didn't have classes on Friday afternoons. He was actually home. He lives across the street from 653 Lightner, a little catty corner, a little further down. He heard the dog barking. He walks out to his front bay window, and he sees a couple of things going on over at Helen Stein's house, and he knows Helen. He's actually good friends with her son Clay, who is also his neighbor, and he had some idea that Mr. Kraus was supposed to go over and look in the garage and take pictures of the antique car to post it on eBay. Only instead what Roger Peen sees is the defendant going into the back door of the house, opening it, go inside, and start carrying out property in boxes. Now, Roger Peen does something at the spur of the moment. He picks up his cell phone and starts taking pictures with his iPhone as to what's happening across the street. And the jury will be seeing those pictures during the course of the trial. Are the pictures shot with a telephoto lens? No, they're shot with an iPhone. Can you tell all the facial features of the person involved? No. Can you identify every piece of property that's in his hands while he's moving back and forth? No. But what you can see is that someone is making trips from the house out to a light brown colored van. Well, when Roger Peen took these photographs, the first thing he did was, and this is the wonderful thing about technology, he sends them to his friend Clay Steins, who's Helen's son, and says, hey, look, I got these pictures. Clay looks at them and sends them to his girlfriend Tabitha Loroff, who looks at him and says, this doesn't look right. What's this guy doing? And that's the question that gets asked by everybody at this point. What's this guy doing? Now, nobody calls the police. Instead, Tabitha Loroff does something different. She calls Mr. Kraus's boss, a guy named Steve Berkowitz, who's a realtor in Sandusky. And the reason why Tabitha Loroff calls Steve Berkowitz is because she knows Steve Berkowitz. In fact, when she graduated from high school, she was Mr. Berkowitz's secretary. So she calls him up and complains and says, why is Mr. Kraus taking property from my mom's house, or my mother-in-law, to B's house? And what you're going to learn is that later that afternoon, on April 4th, Steve Kraus returns back to 653 Lightner Road and gives her a box of stuff that he had removed from inside the house. Apologizes to her profusely, tells her he's a Christian, and this isn't normally the way he does business, and all the rest of those things. And then he leaves. Now, when Helen Steins finds out about this, she goes through the house looking to find out what was taken, what was missing, what had been moved. And this is property that had been in her family for a long time, and she prepares a list. And she sees that there's a 12-gauge shotgun that's missing from inside the gun rack that her son built as a 4-H project. It's in the first floor of the house. It's gone. Believes it to be a 12-gauge Winchester, double barrel. In talking to Clay Steins, who actually owns the firearm, we anticipate he's going to tell you that that firearm was operable, that he'd hunted with it before, that he'd gotten it from his father. Also missing, a couple of antique die-cast cars, some silver hand mirrors, some decorative combs of the style that ladies used to wear in their hair, cigar boxes, change purses, a depression glass dish. A saxophone had been moved. Belonged to Clay Steins. He played in the band in high school. It was upstairs. They found it by the back door, still in its case. An acoustic guitar was missing, bracelets. A photo album had been taken that was actually Helen Stein's grandparents' wedding photo album. Okay? And that was in the box that Mr. Kraus brought back to tap the Laurel. Also in that box was a Tiffany lampshade, or a style similar to a Tiffany lampshade. It's funny, the brass base, the brass lamp, never came back, but the lampshade was returned. An antique pin cushion that used to belong to her grandmother, one of those hand-embroidered things that young ladies used to make as projects back in the day when that was fashionable. Also missing were 2 sets of silver flatware. A carpet beater that was very important to Helen because her grandmother gave it because she did such a good job when she was a little girl cleaning carpets. So that was her personal carpet beater. There was a number of dolls that turned up missing. There was a large doll that Helen had been given as a small child. Remember, Helen's over 65. Back in the day, the doll was so pretty, her parents wouldn't let her play with it, so she kept it pristine for years. Also missing were things like little strawberry shortcake figurines that customers had given her when she was a hairdresser because they knew she liked that sort of thing. Antique, or not antique, commemorative railroad plates that had belonged to her husband. Her younger son's brass drum, or bass drum from high school band with a calfskin head on it, that disappeared, was never returned. Also missing was a wicker baby carriage that was an antique, that was actually up in the attic of the house. And inside that wicker baby carriage was a doll with a wooden head, the old style, pre-porcelain doll. It was well over 100 years old. That never turned up either. So when we talk about all this stuff, what you're dealing here with is actually 3 charges. And 3 charges are how these offenses are defined for the jury to consider. The first charge deals with count of burglary. And what burglary is, as the judge told you earlier, has a number of elements to it. You have to trespass, meaning you have to enter without permission, by force, stealth, or deception into an occupied structure. And when we talk about force can be any number of things. In this case, opening a door to go inside a house is all that the state's required in order to establish force, because somebody applies force to a door in order to trespass. Now, trespass is entering without permission. And it's not that technical when you think about it. Mr. Kraus had permission to be on the property because he was supposed to go into a garage that's not attached, it's a separate building, and take photographs of this Chevrolet antique car. Instead, he goes in the house. Now, we're going to present evidence from Helen Stein that she never gave authorization for Mr. Kraus to go into her house at 653 Lightner. The other person we're going to talk to about that issue is Janine Porter, the realtor, because Ms. Porter was the person who gave him the limited permission to go into the garage. And we anticipate Janine Porter is going to tell you she never gave Stephen Kraus permission to go inside the house. And she certainly didn't give him permission to take property out. But which we know from Tabitha Loroff, that's in fact what he did. And we know from Roger Porter that he was carrying things out of the house. Now, there's a charge in what lawyers like to call in the alternative. If the jury decides this is not an occupied structure because she hasn't lived in it over a number of years, 5 or 6 years before this event happened, you can consider a different charge in the indictment, which is breaking and entering, meaning same elements again. You trespass, meaning you enter without permission, by force, stealth, or deception, into a building or structure in order to commit a crime. In this case, we're talking about theft. Now, the theft count is about taking someone's property without their permission. That's really what it's all about. In this case, because the victim is over the age 65, it makes it more serious. She's in a protected class of people because of her age. And again, this is about taking things that don't belong to you, that you don't have a right to, some of which are quite valuable, some of which the victim got back, and some that she didn't. And that's what we're talking about. Now, when we present this case to you, there's going to be a whole bunch of context you have to understand. The first part is the house over on Lightner Road. A lot of Helen's family lives there. Her son lives next door to 653. Her brother lives across the street. And Roger Peen lives alongside the brother. This is a quiet street. Not a lot of through traffic except in late summer when tourism goes kind of crazy in Danbury Township. Everybody knows everybody else. It's not customary to lock the doors. Everybody knew this was Helen's house. And what you're going to learn from Clay Steins is that he was over there checking the house once or twice a week. All the time his mother didn't live there, and Helen was also going over to check the house as well. Never had any problems. Never locked the back door because he didn't know when this happens. Now, all these people in this case, Helen Steins, Roger Peen, Clay Steins, the people that live out there, Tabitha Loroff, Clay Steins' fiance, none of these people know Steve Kraus. They're just people who, because of this case, became involved in these events. The other person in the case is Janine Porter. Janine's a realtor. She's the person who talked to Mr. Kraus right before this happened. And Janine is going to give you a little bit more background into the sale and all the rest of the stuff because that's her area of expertise. So when we talk about this case, what we're really talking about is whether or not Mr. Kraus went into a house that he didn't have permission to go into. Is the house a home for under Ohio Revised Code? In other words, is it a place that's been adapted for sleeping? And this is a 4 or 5 bedroom house that's still furnished. There's still beds in all the rooms that are bedrooms. There's blankets on the beds. There's all the rest. But the power's off. The water's off. It's a judgment call for a jury to make a decision about it. And then the other part is, did he take things? Now, when we talk about trespassing, there's one other thing you have to understand. If he had permission to go in the house, that didn't mean he had permission to steal. Permission in this case is limited permission, meaning you're there to take photographs so that you can sell something for me and with all the other stuff that's involved. What you're going to learn is Helen Steins never talked to Steve Kraus in her life. Never had contact with him before this happened on April 4th, never had contact with him after April 4th. The two witnesses who did have contact with Mr. Kraus are Janine Porter and Tabitha Laurel. It's extremely important to listen very carefully to the witnesses. This is going to be a short trial. We will be done with the state's case by tomorrow. No doubt in my mind about it. Our witnesses are here. They're ready to go. I don't procedurally see this taking a long time. Please pay attention. You get one chance to hear what they have to say, and they're putting the case in your hands. However, we are confident at the end of all this, you're going to find Mr. Kraus responsible for his behavior. Can I explain why Mr. Kraus did this? Can I give you a motive? The answer is no. But under the law, I'm not really required to. This is about did his behavior violate the Ohio Revised Code or not. His motives are something that's personal to him. I can show you where he was at, I can show you what he did, and I can put people on to talk about whether or not he had permission to do it. And that's what we intend to do. When you get to the bottom of this thing, ladies and gentlemen, that's really your job. You'll make the final decision here. And I'm very confident your decision is going to be guilty of all counts.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I do things a little differently. I tend to rely on electronics a little more, so I will do my best to not let this get in the way of you and I as I talk, okay? You heard the state talk about permission to enter the premises. You heard the state talk about that there was definitively a decision made whether or not Mr. Kraus was or was not allowed on the property. You heard the state claim that Helen Steins never personally met with Mr. Kraus and therefore never gave him permission to enter the premises. However, what you're going to hear over the course of the next couple of days is that when Ms. Steins was interviewed by the police, she told Officer Meisler that her real estate agent may have inadvertently given a male suspect, unknown at the time, permission to enter the residence. Those are the words from Ms. Steins to the police officer. You heard the state indicate they will not be calling the officer as a witness, but we will. So I ask you to be patient after hearing the state's case and not hearing about those statements to give us an opportunity to bring those facts out when we get the chance to proffer our case to you. So I ask you to be patient. You hear that Ms. Steins loved this house dearly. It was her childhood home. Which you also hear that she loved these items so much that they were extremely emotionally valuable to her. What you're also going to hear, and this can't be denied, is that the house had been vacant since October of 2006. 8 years at the time, 8 years, not 5 years, not 6 years, 8 years. You're also going to hear that this house was in such a deplorable condition that it was nearly impossible to walk through the inside. We don't know what was in the house because everything that was in the house was covered in garbage. There was feces, there were dead rodents. All of these extremely important and valuable things were left in this condition. You're going to hear, as the state indicated, that the house was placed for sale. That is correct. You're going to hear that Mr. Kraus and Ms. Porter, the real estate agent that Ms. Steins hired, met at a conference on April 3rd. That is also, I'm sorry, on April 2nd. That is also correct. What I want you to keep in mind is that the house was listed on April 2nd, 2014. On April 3rd, the next day, she got a purchase offer from her son. Not some random person who saw it on the MLS and asked to see it. It came from her son. And she accepted the offer the next day on April 4th. Seems somewhat funny that her own son wouldn't know that the house was up for sale, yet made an offer the next day to buy the contents. Why is Mr. Kraus involved then? Why did the real estate agent on April 2nd ask Mr. Kraus to go look at the valuables in his capacity as an auctioneer? This seemed to be a foregone conclusion how this transaction was going to take place, and was only being done through a listing for certain reasons. The truth is, yes, Ms. Porter and Mr. Kraus met on Thursday at April 3rd at a CLE conference. Mr. Kraus ran into Ms. Porter at this conference. Mr. Kraus is also a realtor in addition to being an auctioneer. So hence he and Ms. Porter are also involved in the same line of work. Ms. Porter asked Mr. Kraus if he still did auctions. She approached him and asked if he still did auctions. And Mr. Kraus responded, yes. She asked if he would look at a house in Port Clinton, and he said, sure. He told her at that CLE that morning that he could be there in a couple hours at approximately 1:30. And he said it was perfect for him because he had another appointment in Ottawa County around 3. Ms. Porter indicated she unfortunately could not be at the property at 1:30, but that he was free to go to the property on his own. Mr. Kraus, being a realtor, being familiar with how normal real estate transactions and listings go, asked for the lockbox number on the house. To which Ms. Porter replied, there is no lockbox. She told him, despite the state's proffer that she's going to say Ms. Porter only wanted him to go into the garage, Ms. Porter told Mr. Kraus, prepare yourself as the house is a disaster. There's no power at the house, and no one has lived there for 8 or 9 years. Mr. Kraus became concerned and said, what am I in store for? Am I going to find carcasses? Things of that nature. Ms. Porter said no. She then advised, my client desperately needs money, and I want to see if you can do an auction on the property. Ms. Porter wanted the auction done within 30 days, and Steve said, that's not realistic. I can do it, but it's going to take me 45 or 60 days. Steve went out to the house. Even though he knew the condition, he had a meeting at 3 o'clock, so he wasn't appropriately dressed to go exploring, if you will. He was in a suit, and he had a long trench coat on. He got to the house. It was a cold, rainy day. He had his coat on. He pulled in forward, facing the back of the yard, not ready to get away. And he went to the back door at the back of the house and went in as he was instructed. Miss Porter said there's no lockbox, go in the back door. When he went in, the house was worse than he even expected. He said there was a teeny little pathway where you could see that somebody had made a path from where you come in the back door, you go up 2 steps to the right to this little room that really doesn't have a definitive purpose. And then there was a teeny little path to the next room, which was the dining room. And then after that, it was a free-for-all of how you got to the rest of the house. Mr. Kraus looked around as best he could, given the condition of the house. He said some doors you couldn't even open because there were things behind them. You could squeeze your head through, you could see a little bit. He said everything was covered in trash. Everything was deplorable. There was feces. There were animal carcasses in there. It was a terrible situation. He went in the basement. It was moldy. It was a mess. He went in the kitchen. There were things hanging out of the cupboards, things all over the appliances, garbage all over the counters and the floors. Every room that he could gain entrance to was the same. Ironically, he saw some things that he thought he may need to get appraised that might be valuable. He's not an appraiser. He's an auctioneer and he's a realtor. He doesn't appraise personal property. He said there were tables flipped on their sides, boxes all over the place with stuff hanging out of them. He found one room in the house that appeared to have 3 feet of beer cans just stacked everywhere. This house was not being lived in. And Ms. Steins admits that on the listing paperwork, that nobody had lived there since October of 2006. Steve realized that in his attire, he couldn't appropriately and properly complete his duty to see if the property could be auctioned. Steve called Janine Porter that afternoon. He said, I think there may be some items in there that might be worth some money, but some are not worth anything. He told her he couldn't tell about certain items, which did include the car, by the way, that was out in the garage, because he couldn't open the door to the garage to get in to see the car. At that point already, Ms. Porter told Mr. Kraus, I have 3 offers on this property already. Now mind you, this is the day after it was listed. Steve said, well, the only other alternative I can imagine is that we sell off the entire property. Let's auction the entire property. We could probably auction it off and get more than just selling the land value. Ms. Porter told Mr. Kraus at that time, I have to get a hold of my client, Helen Steins, but she doesn't have a phone, so I can't get a hold of her. That's extremely ironic because the listing agreement that Ms. Steins signed provided a phone number within where to contact her. Steve went back to his agency in Sandusky and he talked with Jeff Bergquist, who runs his office, who's the broker for his office. He told them, we might have a possible sale, but it's not ours yet. The conversation continued as to the sale of the property between Ms. Porter and Mr. Kraus, about whether or not the property was going to be sold. It appeared that Ms. Porter was pretty set on selling the property pursuant to one of the offers, which we come to find out was ironically from her son the next day. Steve made another offer. He said, okay, well, what if I buy certain things out of the house that I think are valuable, or that I could go get appraised and see if they're valuable and increase the amount of money you can get for your client, rather than selling the house with the garbage in it. Let me see if there are any hidden gems in the garbage, and I'll buy them. Because your client has a money problem, I'll try and help her out even more. Steve texted Janine the next morning. He asked Miss Porter, "Are you up? Can we talk?" Miss Porter said, "Yeah, I'm up." So Steve and Miss Porter communicated, and Steve asked for permission to go back to the property and take a look at the items to see if he could find anything to make her an offer on and get her client some money. Janine's response was, there's bad blood in the family between the brother, the comment was the brother who's in the wheelchair, and Helen Steins at the time. Later in the day, Miss Porter contacted Mr. Kraus and confirmed that the brother was going to buy the house and they were going to close in approximately 14 or 15 days. But that Steve could still make an offer on items within the house before the sale. But that he had to do it immediately given that short window for closing. Steve went back to the house immediately because he had a function that evening, but he looked at his timetable and he goes, I can go right now. I've got a couple hours. Let me go back out there. He went back in normal clothes that you didn't mind getting dirty in, clothes that you didn't mind jumping over trash and feces and carcasses in. He grabbed a couple items. He put them in a box. He also grabbed some bigger items, a saxophone that was in its own case. He took it down to the dining room in the house, which was, as you remember, the first main room that you come in from the back door, the only one that had a little pathway in it. And he put the items down. And when he put the items down, he looked over at a gun case that was in the room and noticed that there was one less gun in it that day than there was the day before when he was in the suit. He became concerned. Being a real estate agent, being an auctioneer, he knew that because he was working with the listing agent, and the listing agent had a fiduciary duty to protect her client's property, he was working in conjunction with that agent, that he had a decision to make. Do I leave this house realizing that there is property missing from the day I was here before in hope that nobody steals it, or do I safeguard at least what I think might have some value until I can figure out what else to do? Steve tried to contact Janine Porter from the house, but was not getting cell phone service. He didn't call her hours later. He didn't call her days later. He went back to his residence in Sandusky, Ohio, and when he pulled into the driveway, he pulled his phone out again, realized he had service, and attempted to contact Miss Porter. As soon as Miss Porter picked up the phone, she said, I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want anything to do with this. Steve was a little perplexed. Janine Porter told Steve, there's guns missing in the house. I'm sorry, Steve told Janine, I noticed guns were missing in the house. I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to safeguard the property. I took what other items that I thought were valuable with me. But I called you as soon as I got to my house to let you know I had them. Janine Porter responded to the gun comment by saying, yes, we know the gun is missing because Helen Stein's son took it. Steve didn't know anyone else was on the property. He had been told the property had been vacant for 9 years. He hadn't been told anyone else was going to be there while he was. Steve quickly realized, oh my God, there's somebody else with their possessions in the house. What did Steve do? He immediately asked to have personal contact with Helen Stein's to find out, what do you want me to do with this property? When Steve looked at his watch, he realized that he didn't have enough time to make contact with people. He had to make a gut decision. So he went back to the house, immediately went back to the house, and he returned the bigger items. He returned all of the items that were in essence guy items, now that he knew a guy was living in the house. He took those back and put them in the dining room. As to the other items, he tried to make contact to determine what he was supposed to do with those. He was apprised that there was a Tabitha Loroff, who you heard the state talk about, who used to work for Jeff Bergquist, who is the broker that Steve works for. Tabitha had contacted Jeff Bergquist, and Jeff Bergquist called Steve saying, what's going on? What's happening here? Steve took the steps to get in contact and make an appointment with Miss Loroff to return those other items to her right away. It was the next morning when they could get their schedules together, and at approximately 4 o'clock on Saturday, April 5th, Steve met Tabitha at the house. Steve took the remaining items, a lampshade and a box full of little trinkets, if you will, and put them in Miss Loroff's car. Put them in Tabitha's car. Now you're going to hear the police report says, according to Miss Steins, a random box of property was left in the driveway. Well, if somebody left the property in the driveway, it was Tabitha Loroff, because Mr. Kraus put it in her car. Tabitha and Steve had a meaningful conversation. Steve actually looked out for their best interests. Steve said, hey, there's other things in this property that I can't get to, but that I can see. For instance, in one of the outbuildings, there's an old metal push cart, you know, like you see your kids in. He goes, I don't know the value of it because I can't tell if it's rusty dented, not rusty dented, but I can see it in the building. I can't get in. But I wouldn't just sell the property and leave that item in here. I would take these items that I had. I would also take the saxophone and the record player and the pedal car and pull those out separately, because you're going to get value for those. What's interesting is the purchase agreement says that Miss Steins was going to be able to get all of her antiques out of the house prior to the closing. So Steve was doing a favor by saying, hey, these are things you might want to look at. Tabitha told Steve that she was the one who had cleared the path, at least into the dining room. Tabitha told Steve that the guy in the wheelchair was mad, not knowing what Steve's intent was with what he had done. Steve said, let me go and talk to him. Let me apologize that I'm sorry you thought that's what I was doing, but here's what I was really doing. Tabitha also indicated at that point that her boyfriend had come over to the house and locked everything up. That not even she was allowed in the house anymore. Steve's boss, Jeff Bergquist, called him and said, look, everybody's talked through everything. Everything's over. Now, mind you, 2 weeks later, Janine Porter sees Steve Kraus at a Republican women's function and came up and hugged him. This incident allegedly happened on April 3rd, 2014. Mr. Kraus went back on April 4th, 2014, which is allegedly when he took the items. But no police report was made, no contact with the police was made until April 7th, 2014. 3 days after the incident allegedly occurred, and after Ms. Steins had already sold the house to her son. Now, you heard the state read you a list of property. Made it sound like that list all came from one incident. What's interesting is, Helen Steins gave Officer Meisler a list on April 7th that contained 15 items and acknowledged that 12 of those had been returned. The only things that were claimed not to have been returned was an unknown number of antique wooden marbles, an antique make model antique 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun, and 2 die-cast cars. We're talking about 12 marbles, a gun, and 2 little matchbox cars. Now, you heard the state read off some other property. What's interesting is, Ms. Steins comes back to the police station not a day later, not a week later. She comes back on May 15th, 5 weeks later, to make a new list of items that had been taken from the house. Why is that significant? Because on April 24th, between April 7th and May 15th, that house legally transferred to her son. It was now his house. He could go in and do whatever he wanted. Who knows what happened between April 24th and May 15th? We don't know. The state isn't calling the son as a witness. But again, be patient because we are. Ms. Steins comes back yet again a week later on May 22nd, 2014. So on May 15th, she adds 8 new items, and on May 4th, she adds 4 new items. And the May 15th, just so you know, so you have some understanding of what was added pursuant to the prosecutor's list, was the 2 sets of silver flatware, the carpet beater, the brass lamp, the large doll, collector's porcelain doll, 3 strawberry shortcake figurines, an antique penguin and perfume bottle, a set of 4 commemorative railroad plates. Remember, these were items that she cared for, yet she couldn't figure out until 5 or 6 weeks later that they were missing. Wouldn't you know where they are? They're so valuable, I had no idea where they were in all the feces, garbage, and trash. May 22nd, she comes back with the bass drum with the calfskin drum head, wicker baby carriage with wire wheels, this ever so sentimental doll that she's had since she was a child, and 3 metal cans, whatever those are. So again, these were so important, it took her a month and a half to figure out they were missing. She didn't know where they were in the house, or she would have gone right to that spot and said, oh, not here. You're also going to hear, this isn't the only conflicting information in this case. You're going to hear Helen Steins, the homeowner, initially say that Tabitha Loroff was the one who took these photographs of the items that were missing. That's what Ms. Steins says on April 7th. Well, We don't hear from Miss Steins through the police department until April 30th, 23 days later, 6 days after the house had already been transferred. Miss Stein says, I didn't take the pictures. I don't know anything about the case other than what my mother told me. So Mom says, Tabitha knows, not her mother. Helen says Tabitha knows everything. Tabitha says everything I learned from Helen. And I didn't take the pictures. This guy did. This incident happened April 1st. I'm straight. This incident happened on or about April 4th, 2014, according to the allegations. This investigation went on. You're going to hear that the investigation was closed in July of 2014. It was closed. Without reason, it was reopened in October of 2014, 3 months later. Now, I don't know why. I'll be asking why, but I don't know why because the police report doesn't say that either. Mr. Kraus is elected as a state representative in early November, and on November 19th of 2014, he gets indicted. You're going to hear the claim that they couldn't determine the identity of Mr. Kraus. But you're going to see photographs. And you're going to hear that when Mr. Kraus returned that box to Tabitha Loroff on April 5th, he gave her his business card. Let me say that again. He gave her his business card. And on April 30th, she told the officer, I'd be able to recognize him in a lineup. Okay. So why is there a delay from April to November? You're also going to hear that Janine Porter, when she was finally interviewed on May 2nd of 2014, told the officer, it's Stephen W. Kraus. He works with Stat Miller Prudential Realty at 1212 Hull Road in Sandusky, Ohio. On several occasions, the officer knew who Mr. Kraus was. In April and in May, and the investigation was closed in July. Ironically, in October, with November elections around the corner, the case was reopened. And 2 weeks after he won, he was indicted. Folks, Steve Kraus doesn't need explicit permission from Helen Steins to enter the property. Helen Steins hired a real estate agent, and that real estate agent was authorized to act on her behalf and had a fiduciary duty to act on her behalf responsibly. She approached Steve Kraus. She wouldn't approach him if she knew him to have a bad reputation. He went to the house, he did what was agreed, and because he also had a fiduciary duty, now being involved with the property to protect it, took the steps that he thought were necessary to protect the property in a temporary fashion. There were several other items on the property that would have had more value than what's alleged that Mr. Kraus took. And he immediately brought it back once he knew that somebody was going to have that property. He wanted to make sure it was safe. He immediately learned that the son took the gun, that it was a family member, and he immediately returned the property to Tabitha Loroff. Folks, this case has a lot of questions. And the state is right, this is going to be a short trial. But we're going to get to the answers to a lot of these questions real fast. But I ask you to think about the facts that I've given to you. Think about the chronology of what I've told you. Think about the circumstances as they unfolded. There's no intent here. There's no intent to commit a crime. And Was the house occupied or not occupied? That's an easy question. It had been abandoned pursuant to the notes on the listing agreement since October of 2006. There's no occupied structure. They want you to think because there was a bed in a bedroom, it's adapted for living. No one had lived there. It was covered in filth and feces and trash and dead animal carcasses. Folks, I appreciate you sitting here and listening to me. I hope you'll continue to listen to the evidence over the next couple days. And I hope that at the end of all this, you'll agree with me that Mr. Kraus had no ill intent whatsoever. He was authorized to be there. He engaged his fiduciary duty to protect the property that he was responsible for evaluating. And he did that. And he did that as any other agent would be obligated to do. Folks, I look forward to you hearing the testimony, and I look forward to, at the end of all that, you coming back and finding Mr. Kraus not guilty of any of these charges, because he didn't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. May I call you for this witness?
Thank you, Your Honor. State would call Helen Steins.
Your Honor, if I could just request a separation of witnesses. I don't know who's
No objection.
in the
All right.
courtroom.
Just make sure that none of the other witnesses are in the court. I'm going to need you to raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give me and the jury will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, self you got it.
Yes, sir.
All right, now keep your voice up so everybody can hear you.
Okay.
All right. By the way, do you mind being photographed? It's okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Keep your voice up, please.
Okay.
Why don't you tell everybody who you are?
My name is Helen Steins,
Okay, Helen? How old are you?
67,
Okay, when's your birthday? When were you born?
July 12th, 1948.
Helen, how do you make your living right now?
I'm retired,
What's your source of income?
Social Security,
Do you have any pensions or savings or anything like that?
no.
Okay. Before you retired, what kind of work did you do?
I was a hairstylist for 40 years, and I also worked for the Sheriff's Department for 10 years.
And what would you do for the sheriff?
I was supervisor in the kitchen.
For the jail?
Yes.
Okay. You've been married.
Yes.
What's your current marital status?
Divorced.
Do you ever have any children?
Yes.
How many?
3.
What's their names and ages?
Clay is 42, Crystal is 41, and Andrew is 37.
Okay. Do those children live in the area?
2 of them do,
Which two?
Clay and Crystal.
Okay. Now, Helen, were you getting into financial difficulties back in early 2014?
Yes.
Can you explain what was going on?
I couldn't keep up with the taxes on my house, and I had some medical bills that had to be paid.
And what was the address of the house we're talking about?
653 South Lightner Road
And where's that house located?
in Danbury Township.
Ottawa County,
Yes,
state of Ohio?
yes.
Now, Ms. Steins, how long has this particular house been in your family?
Probably over 100 years.
Who built it?
My grandfather.
Okay. Does your family still own the surrounding property?
Yes,
Who owns that property right now?
my brother,
What's his name for the record?
David Heinzel.
Okay. And what does David do for a living?
He's retired.
What did he do before he retired?
Besides the farm work, he worked at, I can't think of the place now. It was in Sandusky at a factory.
Okay. Was he ever married?
No,
Any children?
no,
Do you have any other surviving siblings other than David Heinzel?
no.
Okay. Did you make the decision you had to sell your house at 653 Lightner?
Yes,
Why?
I couldn't afford it anymore.
When was the last time you had lived there?
2006.
Okay, so it's been a number of years,
Yes.
about 8 years?
Mhm.
In that gap between 2006 and 2014, where did you stay?
I stayed with my youngest son in Florida for about 5 years, and then I moved back up here to 205 Buckeye Boulevard in the high rise.
Okay. Now, Helen, when we talk about the house at 653 Lightner, what kind of condition was it in 2014?
The house itself was in good condition.
What about the contents?
It was messy.
Okay. Were there dead animals laying around?
No,
Dead animal or animal droppings?
no,
Okay. Were there paths that you had to walk through in order to get from room to room?
not really.
Okay. But the house was full of stuff, is that fair?
Yes.
3 feet deep of beer cans in any room?
My son's bedroom,
Okay. Which son was that?
Clay,
Was that a joke or was that something he did to upset his mom?
a little bit of both.
Okay. Now, when we talk about the house, you hadn't lived in it for a number of years. Were people checking on the house and the house contents during this time?
My brother lives across the street from the house. He kept an eye on it. Clay lives next door to it. He kept an eye on it. And then some friends that are neighbors kept an eye on it.
Would that have been Roger Peen and his family?
Yes,
You made the decision to sell the house.
yes.
Did you discuss that decision with your children or your brother?
Nothing. I just made the decision on my own because it had to be done.
Okay. What did you plan to do with the contents of the house?
I planned on selling it. I didn't want to, but
You had to.
yes.
Where did most of the contents of the house come from?
My grandmother and grandfather.
Okay. The house itself, did you normally keep it locked?
No,
Why not?
didn't have to.
Were there any neighbors who weren't family or friends?
There was one, yeah.
Ever a problem?
No,
In the 8 years the house was not lived in, did you ever have a problem with people coming to the house and taking it?
no,
And in fact, how often do family members check on the contents of the house?
like I said, my brother lived right across the street. He watched it, and Clay checked inside periodically.
Okay. You found a realtor.
Yes,
Who did you find?
Janine Porter.
Okay. And did you sign an agreement with Janine Porter to have her sell your house?
Yes, I did.
And did you talk to Janine about the contents of the house and the contents of the garage and all the rest of this stuff?
Yes,
Okay. Did you authorize Janine Porter to try to sell any of this personal property that belonged to you?
No,
Did you discuss with Janine Porter doing something with the antique car in the garage?
I did do that, yes.
Before we get to that, tell us about the car. First of all, what is it?
The car is a 1932 Chevy with suicide doors, and it's all original.
How long have you owned the car?
About 40 years.
Okay. Who originally bought it?
My husband and I,
And you bought it for what purpose?
we were going to restore it.
Was the car operable?
It was, when we first got it, it would have took some work, but yeah, it was operable.
Okay. In other words, this is something that could be restored.
Yes,
No parts missing,
no,
nothing like that. Now, where was this car located on the property?
in an old garage.
Okay. And did you discuss with Janine Porter the possibility of selling that car?
Yes.
What did you tell her?
I told her I would like to sell it if I knew somebody that could give me an idea what it was worth.
Okay. Did you authorize any particular person to sell the car on your behalf?
No,
Okay. Did you make any arrangements with Janine Porter as your realtor to sell the house contents?
no,
Did you ever discuss with Janine Porter the possibility of auctioning the house?
auctioning the house?
Yes.
No,
What was your plan, Mrs. Steins?
she was gonna try and, or sell it outright.
Okay. Do you know what day the house went on the market?
First part of April, I think.
Okay. And ultimately, did your son buy the house?
No,
Who bought the house?
my brother.
The brother who lives across the street.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did he pay your asking price?
The price, yes.
Okay. And do you recall what that price was?
49,000, I believe.
Okay. And you received other offers as well?
One other one.
And was it as high as what your brother was willing to pay?
No,
Okay. Now, Helen, did Janine Porter ever discuss with you the possibility of somebody auctioning off the house contents?
yes, she mentioned she thought she had somebody she knew that might be able to do that.
Did you ever instruct her to let that person into your house?
No,
Did you ever instruct her to have that person remove your property from the house?
no,
Did that person or anybody ever have an appointment to go through the house and look at the contents that they made with you or anyone else that you know of?
no.
What did you want done
With the contents,
with the car?
with the car,
Yeah.
I would have liked to have sold it.
Okay. Is the car still there?
Yes,
Hasn't been sold by anybody, has it?
no,
Okay. And the contents of the house itself, are they still there?
yes,
Nobody's touched those since all this happened, have they?
no.
Okay. Now, Helen, you've been going in and out of this house all your life.
Yes.
Can you describe the house for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
It's a big farmhouse. It has, you want to know how many rooms and stuff? It has a full basement. It has a bedroom, living room, dining room, and kitchen, and half bath on the first floor. And it has 4 bedrooms and a full bath on the second floor. And it has a full attic above that.
As well as a basement.
I said a full basement.
It's full basement as well. So this is a big old farmhouse.
Yes,
Most of the property inside the house, where did that originally come from?
My grandmother and grandfather.
Okay. When we talk about the house and the house contents, you mentioned there was a first floor bedroom?
Yes,
Who used that bedroom?
no one ever used it.
Who was the last person to use it?
I don't think anybody ever used it. Grandma just had it as a spare bedroom.
Okay. Was there property in that room that belonged to your grandmother?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Did you have that door to that bedroom blocked off for any reason?
Kinda. I had my big old Christmas tree box leaned up against the door.
Was that something you did on purpose?
Yeah,
Why?
so I didn't have to drag it upstairs.
Okay. Were you trying to protect the contents of the room?
Objection. Overruled.
Were you trying to protect the contents of the room?
No, because you could pick it up and move it.
Okay. Were there any other doors that were blocked in any way inside the house?
No,
Okay, so one door was blocked.
yes,
Were all the property in boxes?
no,
When we talk about this stuff, at some point, you learned someone had gone inside your house, is that correct?
yes.
Who told you about that?
My son,
Which son?
Clay,
Okay. And I don't want to go into what Clay told you, but did Clay show you anything?
he showed me some articles that were brought back,
Okay, some items.
right?
At that point, did you go through the house to see if anything was missing?
Yes, I did.
In fact, Helen, how many times did you go through the house looking for missing items?
3 or 4,
You wanted to be certain.
yes,
Okay. And did you also look through the stuff that had been returned?
yes,
Okay, because you wanted to be certain about that as well.
right?
Now, you know Sergeant Meisler here, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
How long do you know him?
About 40 years. 35, 40.
Before he was a police officer?
And I just becoming a police officer.
Okay. Did you know him from the jail? Or from other contacts?
No, I just knew him as a Danbury police officer.
Okay. Did you ever make a decision to come in and see him?
Yes, I did.
Okay, back on April 7th?
Yes,
Did you go in and make a complaint
yes, I did.
to Sergeant Meisler right here?
Yes,
At that time, did you tell him about items that had been missing from the house?
yes, I did.
And did you complain about missing antique wooden marbles?
Yes, I did.
A 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun?
Yes, I did.
Now, who owned the shotgun?
My son,
Which
Clay.
one? Clay. And 2 antique die-cast toys?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
I mean, do you remember what else was missing?
There's all kinds of things missing. I'm missing a hurricane lamp, all glass hurricane lamp, magnifier, a line magnifier, several dolls.
Okay, well, let's talk first about the items we talked about before. Where was the 12-gauge shotgun?
My son had built a gun cabinet when he was in 4-H, and he had his guns in the cabinet,
And where was that cabinet located in the house?
in the dining room downstairs.
When you started checking the house, did you find anything in that cabinet that had been disturbed?
In the cabinet itself,
Yes.
Clay had, but I didn't.
Okay. Did you see anything on the floor that was out of place?
Pistol, a cap pistol, I think they call them.
Okay. And when you say it's out of place, what are we talking about, Alan?
It was in the bottom of the gun cabinet
Okay. And when you found it, where was it?
on the floor. But Clay found it, I didn't.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'd ask that her answer be stricken as hearsay.
Okay, that'll be granted. But please disregard her comment about the cat pistol where it was placed because she didn't see it, somebody else saw it. So please disregard her comment.
Thank you.
Were you with Clay at the time?
No,
Okay, so this was sometime when you were not present, is that correct, Derek?
right.
Where were the wooden marbles?
They were in a bud vase in the bedroom downstairs, in the bottom of the bud vase.
Is that the same room as what they had the
Yes, it was. Tree.
Christmas tree box next
Yes.
door? Okay. You mentioned dolls. Can you describe the dolls?
The one in the bedroom downstairs was about 3 feet high, had on a really pretty blue fancy gown, earrings. My mom wouldn't let me play with it, so it always laid on the bed, fanned out.
Who did it belong to?
Me,
When did you get it?
my grandmother that lived in Chicago sent it when I was maybe 12 years old.
And you're 67 now. What kind of materials was the doll made out of?
Hard plastic.
Okay. Were there other dolls in the house that were missing?
Yes, a porcelain doll that's a collectible.
Okay, when you say porcelain collectible, are we talking about an antique here?
Yes,
Where was this doll in the house?
in a bedroom upstairs.
Can you describe the doll for us?
Had, see, that one had blonde curly hair, and I don't remember what the dress was on that one.
Okay. When you say porcelain, what part of the doll is porcelain?
The head and the arms.
Were there other dolls missing as well?
Yes, I had was my grandmother's doll, was in the baby buggy, or the stroller upstairs in the attic. It had the wooden head and the whole bit, that was gone.
Okay. First of all, how large was that doll with the wooden head?
Maybe about like that, like a foot and a half.
About
Foot?
18 inches or so?
Yeah,
Was it painted in any way?
the head was painted. The hair was painted on, and the eyes and the mouth and everything.
So that was all paint.
Yeah,
Any idea how old that doll was?
it was my grandmother, so it's probably 100 years old.
Okay. What else was missing from the house, Helen?
I am missing a wicker baby buggy.
Okay, was this a doll baby buggy or was this an actual baby buggy?
It's actual baby buggy.
All wicker?
All wicker and wire wheels.
How old was that?
Probably 100 years old.
Okay. Was this with the wooden doll?
Yes,
Where was this stored in the house?
in the attic.
What else was missing, Helen?
Let's see, porcelain dolls. I'm trying to think. Right now, I can't think of the others.
Well, did you at any time write all this down?
Yes, I did.
If you reviewed your notes or your written statement, would that help refresh your recollection?
Yes.
chair over there. Do you want me to put one over there for you?
There's a first one.
I'll get you the. We'll just leave this one over here. So there's no back and forth. You guys can talk amongst yourselves when that's going on if you want to. That way, because you're not supposed to know what's going on anyway. Everybody lets us, I would think pretty soon, but if you really, really have to go, just wave your hand, maybe it'll stop. Thank you.
Helen, I'm going to show you something. Judge, for the record, can I mark these just to share record clear? Thank you. First of all, I'm going to hand you some Market States Exhibit number 10. Can you identify that for us?
Yeah, it's some of the missing stuff.
First of all, who wrote that page?
I did, and
Okay.
it's signed,
And that's the original document, is that correct?
yes.
Okay. Was that something you wrote back about the time you first contacted the police?
Right.
And did anybody prompt you how to make this list?
No,
Okay.
I just wrote down everything that was missing.
After you had the chance to look at your list there, was your recollection refreshed as to what was taken from your house?
Yeah.
Okay. What additional items were missing on this list?
There was 2 sets of silver flatware that were taken out of those. We called it sideboard years ago. I don't know what you would call it now.
Where was the sideboard located in the house?
In the dining room.
What else was missing?
The large doll we already mentioned. I can't-
Can you see this again?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm not trying to make it tricky for you.
A carpet beater. I don't know if any of you are old enough to know what a carpet beater is. That was my job when I was a kid, to beat the rugs, and that was gone.
Your Honor, I'd object that she's reading from the list rather than.
I'll sustain the objection.
Thank you.
I had a brass lamp that was in the bedroom downstairs, and that was missing.
Okay. Did that lamp have a lampshade?
Yes, it did.
Did you ever recover or find the lampshade,
That was brought back.
but not the lamp itself?
No.
Anything else you can recall from this list?
I'm so nervous, I can't think.
Okay. I'm also going to show you some Marcus States Exhibit number 11. I want you to review it carefully for a second.
Okay. The line magnifier I already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
My son's youngest son's bass drum. He played drums in school. I had bought him a bass drum with a calfskin head on it, which you can no longer get. That's gone.
Where was that in the house?
That was in the bedroom upstairs.
Which one?
As you go up the stairs, it would be on the right, the first one on the right-hand side.
Okay. Anything else on this list?
There's pretty much, I mentioned everything else, the line magnifier and all of that, that's on that one.
Okay. Judge, do I get to approach you one more time? There's one last item.
Your Honor, objection
Sustained.
Thank
There
you.
you go. But these were lists you prepared for the detective, is that correct?
Yes,
Now, these two lists we talked about, did you ever get that property back?
no,
Do you have any idea where that property is?
no,
Okay. Now, some items were returned, is that correct?
yes.
What was returned to you?
My grandmother's wedding pictures, they were in a folder. The bud vase that held the wooden marbles, that was returned. Some depression glass was returned. My grandmother's pin cushion that held her hat pins, that was returned. A couple small items.
Okay.
Oh, and the lamp shade, that was returned.
What about the 12-gauge shotgun?
No,
Now, Helen Steins, why did you go to see Sergeant Meisler back on April 7th?
because I was upset that somebody went into the house that was not authorized to go in there and took stuff
From you
from me,
and from your children?
yes.
Did you have a suspect at that time in your mind?
Yes,
And did you give information to Sergeant Meisler at that time?
yes, I did.
So we're clear here. Did you personally ever give Mr. Kraus permission to go into 653 Lightner?
No,
Did you ever give him permission to take your property for safekeeping
no,
or to sell it
no,
or for any other purpose?
no,
Did you ever give him permission to have it appraised?
no,
You met Mr. Kraus.
no,
Ever met him in your life?
no,
Ever talked to him on the phone?
no,
Ever met him in person?
no.
Thank you, Mrs. Stein. One moment. No further questions, Judge.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Steins. How are you today?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Ms. Steins, is there, to be fair to you, is there any portion of your testimony as you sit here reflecting on what you've just said, where in all fairness to you, you'd like an opportunity to correct or clarify any of the statements you've made this afternoon?
I'm fine with what I told you.
Okay. Anything you think may be misinterpreted based on the way you said it?
I don't know what it would be.
Okay. Ms. Steins, you said that you couldn't afford the house, correct?
Right?
How much was the house costing you at that point? Did you have a mortgage on the house?
No,
Okay. All the utilities were shut off, correct?
right?
You had property taxes?
Yes.
How much were those?
They were over $1,000 a year.
Okay. What other expenses did you have in relation to the house?
I had, even though the water was turned off, I still had a water bill,
And how much was the water bill?
$20 a month.
And were you up to date on that?
Yes,
Were you up to date on the property taxes at the time of the sale? How far behind were you on the property taxes?
quite a while, yeah, quite a bit.
Do you have any idea how much money you were behind?
Not right off the hand, I don't.
So your total monthly expenses for the house at that time were approximately, well, you said the property taxes were $1,000 a year?
Well, it was a little more than that,
What's a little more, 1,100?
$1,200,
So roughly $100 a month for property taxes, correct? And roughly $20 for water.
right,
So your expenses on that house were $120 a month. And you claim that you couldn't afford that.
that's right. At the time, I had no job.
Okay. Any other expenses?
There was 2 liens on the house, medical liens
I don't want to talk about liens, I'm talking about monthly expenses.
on the house?
Yes.
No,
She didn't have insurance on the property?
no,
You had all these valuables in the house with no insurance?
I had no money.
You indicate you had lived in Florida for 5 years. When was that?
From probably 2006,
To,
5 years, 2011,
okay. And then you moved back to an apartment on Buckeye Boulevard in Port Clinton?
right?
And you've lived there since then?
Yes.
How often were you going to the house on South Lightner?
Before it was sold,
Yes.
a couple times a week,
Okay. So what would you do at the house?
just look through it and try to straighten some of the stuff up.
Were you able to walk through the house?
Yeah,
You said the house was in good condition, right? And that the only thing wrong with the inside is that it was unorganized? correct?
yes,
Wasn't in disrepair? Yes or no, man?
no,
Was it full of garbage?
not garbage, just junk.
Define for me junk.
Things the kids had left behind, stuff like that,
How long have they been left behind?
since they graduated from high school.
When was that?
I don't remember the years. I already gave you the ages of my kids.
Okay, and they all graduated when they were supposed to?
Yes,
So we're talking roughly 20 years.
yeah,
So there had been junk in the house for 20 years. And did you ever move the junk?
some of it.
And you left your valuable items in with all this junk.
Yeah,
Why weren't the valuable items where you lived in Port Clinton on Buckeye Boulevard?
because I didn't have room for them there.
You have family members?
Yes,
Back, they live right across the street, don't they?
one of them, yes.
And some other ones live on the same road?
My
next-
son,
Next door?
yes.
Why didn't you ask to store your valuable items there?
Because they're antiques and my kids aren't into antiques.
You would have just been asking them to store them, man.
They had their own things. They didn't have any room to store extras.
How much is your rent at your apartment as of April of 2014?
$300
Okay, and how much of that were you paying?
of the rent,
Yes.
all of it,
Okay, and where were those funds coming from?
my social security.
How much money did you get in addition to the month that was allocated, the amount that was allocated to rent?
I don't understand what you're asking.
How much do you get a month for disability?
I don't get anything for disability.
Okay, so they direct pay your rent?
No, I pay the rent out of my social
Oh,
security
out of Social
check.
Security, okay. How much are you getting a month in Social Security?
About $890.
Okay, so you have roughly $500 or $600 left after rent. Would you say the house was in livable condition?
Yeah, needed some cleaning up,
Okay. But structurally it was
yes,
fine? And had you just cleaned up, someone could have moved in and lived there?
yes.
Ma'am, why did you sell the house for the price of the land value only then?
Because if I hadn't have sold the house, the county was gonna take it because of the back taxes.
Okay, and how much were the back taxes?
I don't remember right offhand.
Would the back taxes, if I said $10,059.99, would that seem about accurate?
You've got the paper in front of you.
Well, ma'am, I'm asking you, does that seem about accurate or not?
Yeah, close enough,
Okay. And you also had 2 other liens on the property, is that correct?
yes,
One from Magruder Hospital
yes,
for $11,755.55, and one from Pulmonary and Critical Care for $5,152.73. Does that seem accurate for all those?
yes,
So total liens on the house were approximately $26,000 to $27,000.
You have to speak up.
yes,
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. And you sold the house for $48,000.
right,
Okay, now you said you sold the house, do you remember testifying that you sold the house for the listing price? Isn't it true,
Yes.
isn't it true you listed the house at $49,900?
yes,
So you sold it at $48,000.
right,
And originally, the purchase offer had a different figure listed for the purchase price, correct?
the original purchase,
Correct.
that I don't remember.
And may I approach the legally exhibit? Ma'am, if I were to show you the real estate purchase contract that you signed on April 4th, 2014, do you think that would refresh your recollection as to the correction you made regarding the purchase price? Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Sure. Ma'am, I'm now handing you what's previously been marked as Defendant's Exhibit M, that's M as in Mary. Ask you to take a look at that page, that document. Let me know when you've finished. Had enough time to review it? Got enough time to review it, Ben?
Yes,
And in looking at that document, is that your signature on the last page?
yes,
And is that on the first page where it says sale price, are those your initials next to the purchase price?
no, those are my brothers.
Okay. And do you see where it's been crossed off?
What's been crossed off?
Matt Crocher. See the document just for a moment. Ma'am, number 15 and number 17. Do you see on those lines where it says the purchase price is $48,000?
Yes,
You see there was a correction made there? And your brother initialed it?
okay, yeah,
Do you know what that number, original figure was?
no,
Okay. May I approach again here? Thank you. Take that back from me, man. Thank you. Who ended up buying, David Heinzel ended up buying the property, correct?
yes,
And he's related to you how?
it's my brother,
And he lives where in relation to that house?
right across the street.
So why did you list the property with a real estate agent only to sell it to your brother who lives across the street the next day?
Because I didn't know my brother was interested in buying it.
How'd your brother know it was listed for sale?
Janine put a for sale sign in the front yard. And being living right across the street, he saw it.
So you had never had any conversation with your brother about that house going up for sale?
My brother or my kids, it was my idea.
How long had it been since you talked to your brother?
I talk to him every week.
And you didn't in passing say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna sell the house?
No,
You indicated that you talked to Officer Meisler, correct?
yes,
You said you've known him approximately 35 to 40 years, correct?
yes,
You indicated that when you met him was approximately the same time he started working for the police department, correct?
right?
Sir, how old is Officer Meisler?
I have no idea.
But it's your contention he's worked for the police department for 35 to 40 years?
I've
Yes or
known
no?
him. Yes,
You also didn't make contact with Officer Meisler until April 7th, is that correct?
yes.
Why did you wait 3 days to contact him?
Because I think my son, and this is just my feeling, knew I'd be upset that someone had been in the house and took things, so he kind of delayed telling mother.
So when did you first find out?
On the day of or the day before, I talked to Detective Meisler.
So you found out April 6th, 2014. And what did you do when you found out?
I was angry. Yeah, and then I went over to the house and checked on things.
Okay. How long did you check on things?
How long was I there?
Yes, ma'am.
An hour, hour and a half.
Okay. And had you looked through the entire house?
I looked through part of it and went back again another day and looked some more.
When did you go back again?
On a couple of the days, like, let's see, probably the next day.
April 7th?
Yeah, and then I went and talked to Detective Meisler.
Okay, so you went on April 6th, you then again went on April 7th prior to seeing Officer Meisler.
Yes,
How long did you spend at the house on April 7th?
approximately the same amount of time.
So you've been at the house for at least 2 hours? And
Yes,
given that the house wasn't all that bad, you looked through the entire house,
yes, except
And-
the basement.
except the basement. But all the other rooms, the first floor, the second floor, the attic,
Yes.
had all been looked in. How about the outbuildings?
No,
Okay. What was missing, what ultimately was missing out of the basement?
I don't know, I didn't go down there and look.
Have you ever gone down there and looked?
Not since it happened, no.
Okay. Is it possible some of the items are in the basement?
No,
Well, how do you know you haven't been?
because they were never there to begin with.
Ma'am, if you had been, you went through the house, the entire house, and you went and you gave Officer Meisler on April 7th of 2014 a list of 15 items that had been taken, correct?
Yes,
And you indicated that 12 of those items had been returned, correct?
12 of them?
Yes, ma'am.
No.
Now, how many had been returned?
Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Matter of fact, the stuff that was returned was not on the list.
Okay, ma'am, you lost me. Let's go back. What 15 items were missing when you went through the house on April 7th?
The list that we gave you prior.
The 2 that you were just handed by the prosecutor?
Right.
Okay, and that's what you told the prosecutor, strike that. That's what you told the officer on April 7th?
Right?
Here in a minute, approach. Ma'am, I'm showing you what's previously been marked as State's Exhibit 10. When did you make that list?
This was the first list.
From April 7th?
Yes.
May I approach again? Ma'am, I'd now like to, I'll take Exhibit 10 back from you. I'm now handing you what's previously been marked as State's Exhibit 11. You'd agree with me that that list is dated May 22nd, 2014, correct?
Yes.
So you did not give, pursuant to your prior testimony, you did not give the officer that list on April 7th then, did you?
That list that you just took, I did.
Okay.
This one was
Ma'am, my
later.
question is, as to that list, you did not give that list to the officer on April 7th,
This
correct?
one, no.
Okay. May I approach again? Ma'am, 15 items, you said 15 items were missing on April 7th?
Yes, that's what's on the list.
And I'm handing you what's previously been marked as State's Exhibit 10. How many items do you have listed on that?
3, 4. 14.
And those are on how many lines?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
May I approach him? Thank you, ma'am. So you're saying that on April 7th, 2014, you told Officer Meisler that you were missing 2 sets of silver flatware, a carpet beater, a brass lamp, a large dowel, a collector's porcelain dowel, 3 strawberry shortcake figurines, an antique penguin perfume bottle, and a set of 4 commemorative railroad plates. Is that correct?
Yep.
Ma'am, you indeed went back to the Danbury Police Station. Well, let me, I don't want to jump too far ahead. Let me strike that question. Ma'am, when did the transfer of the house to David Heinzel take place? Well, let me make it easier. Did the transfer of the house take place on April 24th of 2014? And that's when the deed was recorded at the county recorder's office?
Yes.
And you went back to see Officer Meisler 21 days later, after the house was transferred, to give him another list, correct? Now,
Yes.
where's that list?
That's the one, the last one you just showed me.
Well, you went back on May 15th, correct?
I don't remember the date.
How many times did you go see Officer Meisler to give him a list?
A couple times,
A couple, meaning 2?
at least 2,
Okay, possibly more.
possibly.
And each time you gave him a handwritten list?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach? Ma'am, I see 2 lists here.
Yes.
One dated May 22nd, one undated that you said is April 7th. Where's the other list?
These are, yeah, except for the glass hurricane lamp. That's not on this list.
Okay. So you only gave the officer 2 lists?
Yes.
Okay. So if the officer reported that you gave him 3 lists, you would say that's incorrect?
Yeah.
Now did you, strike that. As to the April 7th list, as you claim, some of those items were returned to the house, correct?
No.
No. Items that weren't on the list were returned to the house.
Right.
Well, why weren't the items that aren't on the list on a list?
Because those were returned.
Okay. So what items were returned?
Photos of my grandmother's wedding pictures, an album, a rosebud vase with wooden marbles inside of it, depression glass thingy that my grandma had sitting on her dresser, a pin cushion that had my grandmother's hat pins in it, and some other small items, like combs and...
So the wooden marbles were returned.
Yeah.
So if the officer's report indicated that an item was taken and not returned was antique wooden marbles, that'd be incorrect.
Right?
And these items were returned, were they returned on one occasion or 2?
Just one that I know of.
Okay. So there may be other occasions that you're not aware of?
No, I'd have known.
Okay. Just like you knew that the house had items taken from it days before because nobody wanted to tell you?
I don't know why they didn't tell me, but I didn't find out until a couple days afterwards.
Okay. Well, you would agree with me that they were left in a white colored cardboard box, correct?
Yes,
And it would be your position that they were just dropped off in the driveway, correct?
no,
Okay, well, where were they put?
in the house,
Where in the house?
dining room floor.
Dining room floor. They weren't put in Tabitha Loroff's car?
That I don't know, but when I saw them, they were on the floor in the dining room.
Okay, so you saw them on the floor in the dining room, but you don't know necessarily that that's where they were returned to.
No,
Is that correct?
right?
Okay.
Who's longer do you have this?
I have quite a bit, Your Honor. You
Okay,
wanna
let's
take
go
it?
ahead and take our afternoon recess. Remember my admonition, don't discuss case amongst yourselves. Anybody else, keep an open mind, and we'll go ahead and be back at 20 after. And we can see you back here. You're not allowed to talk to anybody.
That's not bad idea.